Good afternoon. Wanted to talk very briefly about this project here. It's actually still a little tacky. I just finished. I put a coat of Minwax antique oil on it. That's a finish I really like using for a lot of really most projects, to be honest. That or the really traditional like a BLO and a couple coats of wax, something like that. I don't like staining wood, and because I don't live in a Victorian castle. I don't like really fancy finishes on things I make. But what I really wanted to talk about was this. I finished up this box today, and I probably would have had it finished last Sunday, but what happened was I ended up helping a family member move, and what I thought was only going to be a few hours ended up to being an all-day affair. So that sort of put the it really because I had other things planned this week. It really just threw the whole week off. But what I was able to do was I did during the week. I glued up the lid, or I mean, in the sense that this is made of, believe it or not, this is made of 5 different boards. They were that I had edge glue, and so I glued those up earlier in the week, sold it to finish size. Then I attached these ends here, these with, hopefully you can see there's a couple dowels and glue. And I thought it turned out really well. If it's going to be tough to get in here, but in terms of seams, you can't really see any seam there, and that's really what you're going for. What sort of is disappointing is this last board here. You can obviously tell that it was a completely different board, and I had to sort of improvise because when I did the final sawing to length and width, really the width, I had to plane it down and get the board. There was some. It was askew when I sawed it. I actually used a hand saw to saw, and because I just didn't feel like I should have used a table saw, to be honest, but I didn't feel like maneuvering the whole thing out for just to cut one board. It seemed like really excessive. So I did hand saw it, and it was askew. Thankfully not bad, but the board really was a touch too short anyway. I wanted a little bit of overhang. Initially, when I glued up and I did the planing, I only wanted the board to come to the very end, but because I was going to put a latch of some type on there, or a lock even, but I couldn't find any hard in our local hardware stores, and I even tried Lowe's and Ace Hardware as well. I didn't see anything that I liked. So rather than, and the whole idea behind this project was making something that a beginner or somebody with just a little bit of experience could make with things that you had around, and not spending a crazy amount of money. And as always with these projects, the most disappointing thing is, I'm sorry, at work I lifted up a show today, but I got a bad bruise on my arm up here. It hurts pretty bad actually, and it's cold in here too. That for some reason makes it hurt more. But what I really want to talk about when you're making these projects is everything always comes down to, in a lot of cases, hardware. Anytime you need hardware on a project, it is really important to get the best hardware you can get, because cheap hardware will really it will frustrate you to no end. And these two hinges were no exception. I paid they were $5, I think, and I wasn't going. I didn't purchase them because they were the cheapest thing on the board. I purchased them because of their size. I did not want a larger hinge. Well, I wouldn't have minded a wider hinge, but I did not want a hinge with a larger plate. And looking back on it, what I should have done is use a larger, beefier hinge and glued underneath here a like a backer board so I could attach the hinges to it. That may have allowed me to use a bigger, more beefy hinge, and it's not even the hinges so much. It's the screw hardware. The screws that come with these hinges are almost always complete junk, and that in and of itself is not as much of an issue as there's nothing else that will really work in their place because of the way these hinges are too thin to drill out on your own. Meaning, I could use maybe a beefier screw, but I would have had to countersink it more. There's not enough material there to countersink, so I had to use the factory screws, and they're just really not very good. And it becomes really frustrating when you're in that type of situation, and that took me longer. Getting these two hinges mounted today took me as long as getting the entire top cut to glued up. I mean when I say glued up, prepping the boards by edge joining them. Adding the additional board when I found that I was a little bit short, adding these little pseudo breadboard ends, and sawing everything to length. These hinges took longer than that. Not because installing the hinges is difficult. It's I mean, if you've ever done it before, it can seem a little tricky, but because of the screws I was working with here, you have to be extraordinarily careful. If you're not, you're strip them out, and then the only thing you can do to correct that is to drill out the old screw with a like a titanium bit or something like that, and which I actually had to do on this side here. You won't be able to see it, but one of the screws, it was not seating right, so I drilled it out. I was able to get it out, but what I had to do was drill out the original screw hole, plug it with a dowel, let it dry for a day, and then I reattached the hinges, and that made it at least made it somewhat better. But the real goal here is not making this box per se. It's making projects that fit your skill level and your budget. Really, this entire box here was made with boards that were either left over or scrapped from this. I mean, like offcuts. So it didn't cost me anything in the sense that I had those boards left over because I used them elsewhere. But even if I had gone out and paid for all of the material here, it all said and done, including tax, it's under $50. Once again, I'm not trying to say that $50 is throwaway money, but in terms of woodworking, it really is. Most woodworking projects, you're going to find, in most cases, it's almost always cheaper to buy furniture than it is to make it. Even good for I've seen woodworkers argue, well, I can make something better than IKEA. Well, yeah, you certainly, most woodworkers can, who are experienced and have some decent workshop, but you're not really saving any money is the point, and that's leaving out the expense of your tools and your other items. Just the material alone, you're not saving money. Even if it's twice as good as IKEA, you're not saving any money. You're spending more. And the point being, we don't, most people I know that woodwork aren't doing it because they can save money by building their own furniture. That's nonsense. You can't, I've done the math, you can't do it. That's why there's so few professional one shop woodworkers. They can never compete with a a factory or a larger shop, because the larger shop generally can put out work just as good as theirs and do it a lot less with a lot less expense. And what I'm getting at is we build, most people who build things, who woodwork, do it because they enjoy doing it and they enjoy working with their hands and things like that. And that's what I'm getting at here. You can certainly make projects that are in your skill level that without really spending a boatload of money. You're not going to be confused with making fine furniture, but you can enjoy yourself and you can make good solid projects. And this box looks fairly simple, and it really is. It's just a lidded box. I went over to joinery in the last video. It's if you want to call them rabbet joint or dado joint or however you want to describe it, it has a bottom panel that's grooved. It has some dowels that are used to as a sort of mechanical fastener to add a little bit of strength, and they don't look bad. They do add a certain look to the piece. I could have maybe added another dowel on all the sides to really make them stand out, but it's just really showing you what you can do. And don't think that this is easy either. It's not. It does take some skill. Namely, like getting these hinges set is not. If you've never set hinges before, these are only an eighth deep. These recesses. Doing that is not. It does take some skill. Getting your rabbets and your grooves and all nice, straight, tight fitting. If you can see that, it does take some skill. It's not as if you're going to go into this project and bang it out in an hour or two and move on. It will teach you a lot of fundamentals. Maybe that's the best way to put it. And that's really all my whole goal with this was. And I certainly will use this. And it won't just be something I'm going to throw into my shelf in my garage here. I'm going to use it to store paper, some documents, I should say, that I had mentioned before. I don't build throwaway projects, not anymore. I can't think of anything more wasteful than doing that. So I hope if you watch these videos, and I hope you maybe you'll give something like this a try. It's as I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be a box or anything like a box. I'm talking about the skill level needed to build a project like this one. It's the basic joinery you need to understand, cutting to length, doing your layout, those type of things, going up panels, all those little things that will serve you well down the road if you ever do get to the point where you want to make more complex and more refined furniture. It's really good to start with stuff like this, and it will teach you it will even teach you how to finish, applying finish and all that, and seeing what finishes work and which ones don't. And the other thing, I really, this is a whole nother topic really. It's project momentum. And like last weekend, I was really moving along with this. And then on Sunday, as I said, I ended up helping out a family member. And this is not a knock on that at all. I'm just saying that when that happens, that project momentum you have, sometimes it gets really like thrown off. And in my case, it did. And it's nobody's fault. It just happened. It's part of life, part of being an adult. But what I ended up doing was, rather than rather than attempting to during the week, squeeze it all into one night, I broke it down into segments where I could have, where I knew I had 10, 15, 20 minutes, I could get something done in that time. That's what I chose to do. And that's a whole other topic as well. I've actually written about this on my blog before, is when you're first starting especially, it's a good idea to keep a log of how, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be that detailed, but just a written log, and I always keep a notepad handy, and I just write down measurements and like for this project, I wrote down here the hardware I used, and the size and the width of the boards, and date it as well, just to have that record, because what it does, beside having to have it a reference, you begin to understand how long certain tasks take you, and when you realize I only have an hour to set aside today where I could really get into my project, you'll understand that there's certain things you can and can't do in that hour. And there's nothing really worse than being in the middle of a project and having to stop for whatever reason, and knowing that you won't be able to get back to it in a timely manner, where you might have to stop for a week or two when you're halfway through an operation. That's really the most frustrating thing you're ever going to run into, as a home woodworker. So give something like this a try. I think it will really benefit you down the road, and it will help you improve your skills immediately. And the other thing I would say, maybe the best piece of advice I'll ever give you, is whatever you make sure it's useful to you. That's another really frustrating thing, is to make something. This is why one of the things that burned me, why I'll never read a woodworking magazine again. I saw so many projects, almost like, and when you're naive and you're first starting, and you see these you take people's advice because you have nowhere else to turn, and you see these projects that they list that you definitely need to make this, and then you make it, and you're like, what the hell am I going to do with this? So it's not like practicing. It's not like going to the gym and working out. When you go to the gym and work out, all you do, all you're doing is you're spending your time. When you build a project that you don't need, you're wasting your time, because you're either building up clutter and you're spending money in the process to do it, or you're making something that really has it's unnecessary. Make things that are necessary to you, even if it's a napkin holder. That's better than making a much more complicated project that you have no room for, no need for, or no use for in your house. So, that all being said, I hope you consider these type of projects, and branch out from there. Maybe that's the best way to put it. What I'm going to do tonight, I am heading out for a little while, but when I get home tonight, I'm going to apply finish to the underside here. I'm not going to finish the interior. I'm just going to wax that. And tomorrow afternoon I will apply the final coat. I usually use 2 coats of the antique oil. I found that that's best. 3, you can use 3, but it gets a little glossy, and I don't like pieces that are overly glossy. And a couple other things, I thought this was really cool. As I said, I was helping a family member move. I found this chisel. I started to clean it up a little bit, but what I think I'm going to do is just I'm going to sand this down to the bare wood and apply a new probably antique oil again, or maybe BLO, and a couple coats of wax. Then I'll get this reground and sharpened. And another thing I thought was really cool, this really old heavy-duty cleaver. This thing, I mean, this is really hefty. It actually still has a pretty decent edge on it, which is a good sign. But I think I'm going to really clean this up as well and get it sharpened up, and just to have it's really not a certainly not a woodworking object, obviously. And the last thing was this old level. This I will probably just clean it up. I don't want to necessarily refinish it, but if it comes down to that, I will. But I think what I'll do is this: I'll clean it up with BLO and steel wool. See how it looks, and if it looks half decent, I'll put a couple coats of wax on it and call it. Actually, still works just fine. So, but yeah, I hope to. My next videos, maybe I'll talk about that, do a little bit of sharpening, and I will before this is before I bring this into the house, I will do another video just to see it completely finished. So I appreciate you watching. Thanks, and have a great day.